You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
Hey, good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Chris.
Hey, by the way,
good evening.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
As we're thinking about when people are listening.
Yes.
It reminds me that yesterday I had breakfast with somebody on staff and then a good friend of mine, and we went to this restaurant called First Watch.
Yeah, I love First Watch.
Yeah. One of the servers attends Heritage. Oh. And she said to me, that, believe it or not, she says, "Hey, I listen to the Bible Guys."
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool."
Hi, server.
And she said, "I listen to it when I take out my ducks."
Ducks.
And I said,
Really?
and then the friend of mine said, "You mean dogs?" She said, "No, ducks."
Ducks.
She says, "Yeah, I have a couple ducks. They live in the garage, and then I take them out back, and they walk around." And she goes, "And while they're walking around in the back, before I put them back, before I go to work, she says, I have my Bible time."
That's so awesome.
And I listen to the Bible Guys, and I'm back there in the nature.
All right.
And she said, "I listen to the podcast while my ducks are in the back eating."
Well, there you go.
And that's
cool is
that's
that?
a routine for her.
Yeah.
And so you know what I said?
No.
I said, "Well, maybe I'll mention you on the Bible Guys."
Oh. So there's the mention.
And there I just did.
Hi, server lady.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And hello to your ducks.
Yes.
We hope that the ducks are doing well today.
And of course, she was wonderful. Great server.
Yeah. Does she raise them for the eggs? Is that what
She actually, she said they're avid egg layers.
Yeah.
And she brings them into First Watch all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And so when they, how First Watch promotes, if you're familiar with the restaurant, cage-free eggs and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, she actually,
Yeah, duck eggs are good.
Yeah.
That's great.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very neat. Thought I'd
Okay.
mention that. Well, hey, today we're starting out with a segment called Two Truths and a Lie.
There you go.
And I know it's Friday, so sometimes we switch it up, right?
Yeah, what makes Chris mad this week?
Right.
Today it's what's going to make Chris lie.
Yeah, that's right.
Week.
So Desiree says, come up with two truths and a lie about some of your, get this, past work experiences or present, and see if Jeff can figure out which statement is a lie.
Okay, great.
So I did have to think about this one about 2 minutes ago.
Okay.
And I came up with three outlandish stories.
Okay.
Here's the first one. The first one is that I had a friend in this small church that I was a part of who was up on stage singing in a quartet, right? A traditional quartet, right?
Yes.
So 4 men standing up there, 4 microphones. And I was in the back of the church. It was a small church, so he could see my face. I was making faces at him, trying to get him to laugh.
Yes.
Well, I didn't realize that it would actually cause him to bust out laughing and ruin the song. And literally, he could not stop laughing, and they had to shut the soundtrack off.
Oh, no.
Because they were singing the cassette tapes at the time. And then he calls me out and points me out and says, it was Zarbaw's fault he was making me laugh in front of the whole church.
Great.
That's story number
That's
one.
Okay.
Quartet
laughing.
Story number 2. I was sitting on a stool, like a wooden stool. I had shorts on because I lived in Georgia, so everything was usually shorts, right? Shorts and a t-shirt with my youth group. And they were all sitting on the ground. So they were beneath me, right? Like crisscross applesauce.
Yes.
And I accidentally passed gas on this wooden stool. Oh, no. And it made the biggest saw noise in the world.
Okay.
It was the loudest thing on the planet.
Okay.
And everybody laughed, and I had to dismiss everybody because I could no longer continue my lesson.
Okay.
Because nobody would be quiet.
Great. Okay.
You're like, let's get through that one.
Great. So quartet, laugh.
And then passing
gas on a wooden stool.
Yeah.
And
the third one is, I brought teenagers to a mall on the way to some winter retreat, and we would always do this thing called Red Rhinoceros, where I would have somebody wearing red in the mall have a gift card, and anybody wearing red, you had to run in. It was hilarious, and you had to walk up to strangers and say, "Are you the Red Rhinoceros?" And people are like, "No, leave me alone." And if somebody was wearing red, they would just get bombarded.
Right.
Okay, so as I did this, there were so many people that asked one of the security guards who was wearing red, because it was Christmas time, it was winter retreat. They asked him so much that they grabbed one of my kids and locked them up and threw them in like the mall jail.
Wow.
Until I had to find them and go apologize and get them out.
Wow. Okay. So Red Rhinoceros. Gas on the wooden stool.
And
Quartet. I'm going.
All three are
to
very believable.
say
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to say the quartet is true.
It is true.
And I'm going to say getting your kid arrested is true.
It is not true.
It's not true, really.
Yeah, I did the gas thing.
Oh, wow.
The gas thing really happened to me. Yep.
So the lie was the lie was getting kid arrested.
Yes.
It just seems to me like you're the kind of youth pastor that gets your kids arrested fairly often. So that was the
Hey, but by the way, red rhinoceros, have you ever heard of that?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Because we did that all the time.
Yep.
And now today, I think that people would be super irritated with it.
Oh yeah.
But
Well, they were super irritated back then too, but there weren't as many consequences.
Yeah, I was thinking 30 years ago, it seemed to be more fun, than the idea seems now.
Yeah.
It seems like
it was less intimidating having a group of teenagers run up to you,
right.
25 years ago, 30 years ago than it is now.
So before 9/11, I actually used to play airport scavenger hunt.
Oh, uh-huh.
When you were allowed to
go to the airport.
Remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I released 90 kids in the airport, and I released 3 fugitives. And these fugitives were allowed to walk, and they all had clues, and they pieced together for a phone number, right? And they were like mixed up numbers. And so literally, you got FBI, side profiles of pictured people wearing wigs, and you'd have to run through the airport and find them. And then it led you to first, second, third locker, right?
Right.
And so anyway, but these kids would run through the airports, and dude, you can never ever
do
pull
that
anymore.
Not anymore.
Right?
It's a different world.
Yep.
Different world. Yeah. Sometimes I think about all the things we did as youth pastors as I'm trying to talk to our current youth pastors and go,
right.
Well, you can't do that. And you couldn't do that. And I don't even know how to do a youth group anymore.
No.
Most of the stuff we did, we couldn't do anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
I did get sued a couple times, not me, but our church, when I was a youth pastor for kids getting hurt because the events were too hard. One time a girl broke an ankle, and one time somebody's insurance company sued because she got another girl got hit in the eye with a ball and detached her retina. She's fine. They had to sew it back on, but
oh my goodness.
So we were too rough.
I've never had that
back in the day,
but I should have been sued a million times.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a youth pastor anymore, and that's why right there, because parents should not allow their kids to go on youth events with me because somebody's going to get hurt. Okay. Well, today we are in a really interesting, this might be surprising. This one today might be a little surprising for people. And we've referenced this idea before, but Jesus goes straight at the heart of it here. So he's telling the parable of the vineyard workers in Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16.
Yep.
Jesus said, "For the kingdom of heaven is like the landowner who went out early in one morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay the normal daily wage and sent them out to work. At 9 o'clock in the morning, he was passing through the marketplace and saw some people standing around doing nothing. And so he hired them, telling them he would pay them whatever was right at the end of the day. So they went to work in the vineyard, and at noon and again at 3 o'clock, he did the same thing. At 5 o'clock that afternoon, he was in town again and saw some more people standing around. He asked them, 'Why haven't you been working today?' And they replied, 'Because no one hired us.' The landowner told them, 'Then go out and join the others in my vineyard.' That evening, he told the foreman to call the workers in and pay them, beginning with the last workers first. And when those hired at 5 o'clock were paid, each received a full day's wage. When those hired first came to get their pay, they assumed they would receive more, but they too were paid a day's wage. When they received their pay, they protested to the owner, 'Those people worked only 1 hour, and you've paid them just as much as you paid us, who worked all day in the scorching heat.' And then he answered one of them, 'Friend, I haven't been unfair. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage? Take your money and go. I wanted to pay this last worker the same as you. Is it against the law for me to do what I want with my money? Should you be jealous because I'm kind to others? So those who are last now will be first then, and those who are first will be last."
Yep, there it is. Yeah, and
so Jesus says that this is the kingdom of heaven. This is God's kingdom.
Right.
Jesus is telling us God's not fair.
Yeah, and by the way, this was the first passage I ever preached at Heritage.
Oh, really? Yeah.
As a staff member.
Yeah.
As a staff member. I spoke at your church several times, actually twice before I got there. But as a staff member, this was my first Sunday there, and I remember asking the question, "Is God fair?" And then, of course, this explanation is: not only does God not pretend to be fair at all, right? He's incredibly unfair to our advantage, right? But I love how he gives the no explanation. He literally says, in another translation, "What business is it of yours?
Right.
What I do with my own money?" right?
Yes.
And what he's saying is that he's saying, like, my business is my business. I don't even have to give you an explanation.
Yeah, I don't have to answer you.
Yeah. But at the same time, he actually is fair to the people who actually thought he was unfair. Just because he rewarded the people who worked only an hour with the same wage doesn't mean that he wasn't he was not unfair, right? Because he says that. He says, friend, I haven't been unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work all day for the usual wage?
Right.
Right. So in other words, what he's really saying is, I wasn't unfair to you. I was just unfair in the good sense
I was generous.
to them.
I was generous to the other one,
Right.
which feels unfair to you.
Which feels unfair to you, right? Yeah. So
they're not working hourly. I mean, the union steward would come in and just pitch a fit about this, right? The union would be so mad. But they're not hourly workers. He hired them to do a day's work.
Right.
And by the way, this is a long day because he hired the first group at 9 and he hires the last group at 5.
Right.
And then they work for a while and then he shuts the party down. So they worked, this
Probably till 6.
This is probably a 10-hour day or something pretty close. 9 or 10-hour day. And so they agreed to a day's work. And their reward at the end of the day was a day's wage. What's fair?
Which, by the way, was a Greek denarius.
Oh,
which is
a denarius was a 1 day's wage.
It was a Roman's soldier's 1 day wage.
Yeah.
And so, and by the way, that was a very fair wage because actually that wage was referenced in the Old Testament. I think it was in Deuteronomy as paying people fairly and giving people what they deserve. And so Jesus was using that as the measuring stick. So when he started the parable, people would have immediately been on board.
Right.
They would have been,
I'll pay you a day's wage.
That would pay you a day's wage. And so people are like, that sounds fair. Right. I mean, so this must have been a very good man. So he sets the precedence as this vineyard owner is a good man already to the people who worked all day.
Right.
So that's important, I think.
And then again, 3 hours later, and then 6 hours later.
Right.
And then 8 hours later.
Right.
He goes and hires them and goes, and I'll pay you a day's wage.
Yeah.
Right.
And so imagine the suspense. Jesus is a master storyteller.
Right.
And so imagine the journey of the listeners. So he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner and he's paying him a day's wage. And you're like, great. And so so the setting is set, right? Because I love good storytelling. And then he says, and then he goes out and he hires this guy and then this guy and then this guy later.
Right.
And then he starts with paying the guys who only worked 1 hour.
Right.
And he says he gives them a full day's wage, right? And so you can imagine, like a good movie, like a good story, they're on the edge of their seat probably thinking, okay, like what's the last guy going to get who worked all day, right? And by the way, think of the implications of this because he starts off by saying the kingdom of heaven is like.
Yes.
So the listeners who are the Pharisees are like, ooh, I'm the worker who worked all day.
Yeah.
Right?
I've been working at this a long time.
I'm going to get so much more than these other guys, right? The application is pretty clear. And so think about all the Christians who have served God their whole lives versus the thief on the cross.
Yeah.
Right? So
at the last minute, he places his faith in Christ.
It's like Billy Graham versus the thief on the cross, or me, right? Hey, I've got 30-something years in, right? The thief on the cross had 30 seconds in, so or whatever it was. But the bottom line is it's like that's the guy who works 1 hour, and so for those, it's the older son in the story, right? Who's been faithful his whole life in Luke 15. It's the person who's been all their lives who think they deserve more. It's the entitled person. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that way, but like it's also every Christian who serves God with their whole lives who feels like, how in the world, is somebody on death row going to turn their life over to Christ, right? You saw recently in the news, Hulk Hogan.
Oh yeah,
just got baptized and turns his life over. Yeah. Pat Benatar, we're doing this costume party. We're flying down this weekend to go. To do this thing. And I guess by the time this airs, it'll be over, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So we're doing a surprise birthday party for my daughter who doesn't know we're coming. She's turning 30, right? So we're all dressing up, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's being
surprise.
Surprise! Somebody's being Eminem. Somebody's being, my daughter's Ariana Grande. Well, my wife says Pat Benatar. You want to know how hilarious my wife is? She goes online and she wants to sing a certain song that Pat Benatar sings because we had to do karaoke. But in the video, Pat Benatar plays this prostitute. my wife goes, I can't be Pat Benatar now. And so I go, why? She goes, well, in this video, she plays a prostitute. I'm like, she wasn't a prostitute. I'm like, she's a singer who plays a prostitute in a video, right? With redemption, by the way. I'm like, she's not a what are you thinking, Liz? She goes, but I don't want to be associated with the song.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
well, good for her. Don't make her sin against her conscience.
Okay, here's my point. Yeah. My point is that then my wife comes back to me and goes, guess what? I said, what? And she goes, just recently, Pat Benatar became a Christian after 40 years, right? Of not being a Christian, of living the rock and roll life. And I said, so what does that mean for you? And she goes, it means that I think I could now feel good about being Pat Benatar. I was just like, that's hilarious. Yep. So anyway, all that to say, the application must have been shocking for the Pharisees or the religious people listening, because they now know that God rewards generously to those he loves.
So it's interesting. Yesterday we finished up talking about Jesus speaks to this rich young man, and he says, I've obeyed all the law.
Right.
And he said, okay, well then sell everything you have, and your money is what's between you and God right now. Right. Your money is your number one thing. And he leaves sad. And then Jesus turns and talks to disciples, remember? Mm-hmm. Verse 30 ends, and you got to remember in Jesus' world, it wasn't chapters and verses.
Right.
So this is the first verse of the very next chapter says, for the kingdom of heaven. It's like, Jesus isn't done explaining to the disciples.
Right.
Right. So he's explaining to the disciples that everything, no matter what you feel like you sacrifice for me, that's his ending, right? No matter what you feel like you sacrifice for me, God will return it to you. And he says, because the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning, right?
Yeah.
And so God is going to be outrageously generous to you, is what he's saying here. So grace is equal for everybody. Nobody gets more or less. Nobody gets a better or worse version of grace, right? God's grace is extended to all of us. And the you've heard it say, we've said it before, the ground is level at the cross.
Yep.
And so what he's saying is, whether you've been a long-time Christian or a short-time Christian, whether you have been walking with God for your entire life, or you just recently started following Christ, the power of God is available to you. The blessings of God are available to you. It's not that there's no classes of citizens in the kingdom of heaven, right? That's what he's saying. He said there's not the elites and the ones that are getting overtime pay versus the ones that are right. And it's surprising. I think it's surprising to the religious leaders especially, but he's talking directly to his disciples in this situation, trying to tell them, listen, grace is going to be equal for everybody.
Right. And for some people, they may think that sounds incredibly unfair, because there are people who actually seem to go through life thinking that everything needs to be fair, right? And yet God, unapologetically sort of announces it's not about fairness. Right, he's going to be incredibly unfair to our favor, and fairness ended in the Garden of Eden. Right. So God's gonna love who he loves. He's gonna reward who he's gonna reward. He's going to do what he wants to do, and it's not about fairness. It's about God's grace and love and generosity to all of us.
So if you trusted Christ and started following Christ when you were a boy, I started following Christ 7 years before you did.
Yep.
Yeah. So I feel like I should get a little bit more benefits than you in heaven.
Yeah, that little pinky ring.
That's 7 years.
A little extra pinky ring in heaven.
And then we've got people in our church. We've got a couple. Bonnie and I went to dinner with them a few weeks ago, and they listened to the podcast. That they're in their 80s and they've been walking with the Lord their entire life.
Right.
So if suddenly this was the end and we're all standing before the throne, they followed the Lord for 80 years. I've only followed the Lord for 40 years. You followed the Lord for 35 years.
Right.
Right. So it might feel like, because I've had more time in the kingdom than you, and they had way more time in the kingdom than me, that it feels like they should get more. God should reward them more. That's because we're obsessed with time on this earth, and we think that this really is mostly all there is.
Right.
But 1.5 billion years from now, my extra 8 years don't really matter.
Right.
Right? So in the scope of eternity, time is not an issue. So we get obsessed with time. How about you had all the benefits of following Christ, working for the King all this time, and then he rewards you. And at that point, time won't matter anymore. The amount of time it took won't matter anymore. What he's trying to highlight is the gift, the reward is going to be so great that no price you paid was too much. Because he's talking in context of the sacrifice that they made, right? Isn't that's how Matthew chapter 19 ends, is you will be rewarded for your work. Let me tell you how. It will be so extravagant of a reward that no price and no amount of time, no amount of sacrifice will feel like it was too much, because the reward will be that good and it'll be equal for all of you, right? That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
and I love how he goes out and finds people that he doesn't even necessarily know. And if you think about it, he highlights the fact that these people are alone and forgotten and neglected, because he says, "Why haven't you been working today?" Right? It's almost like there's a care there, right? Yeah. There's an absolute, genuine care. Yeah. You should be earning a wage sometime to provide for your family. How is it that you're not working? Yeah. Well, because no one has hired us. Right. They're forgotten. They're overlooked. They're not hired. They're not important. They don't have opportunity. And so the landowner says, "Go out and join others in my vineyard." And that evening, he sends other people out to hire other people. So it's that he's not just rewarding those who are faithful. He's seeking those who are uncared for, right? Unloved, forgotten, the marginalized, the ones that seem far from him. He's
unhireable by others.
Unhireable by others. Yeah, that's good. Unhireable by others.
Nobody
that's
else
really
would
good.
choose them.
Yeah. So the picture here is he's seeking, right? He's finding those. He's seeking and save those who are lost.
Yeah. And then he ends, and we can end with this. He says, "Should you be jealous because I'm kind with others?" He's kind of implying the flip side of that is, you guys shouldn't be arguing about who worked more hours. You should all be celebrating that everybody's being rewarded, right? That's how good the reward is. But why? The king is so rich. This rich man is so rich that the fact that somebody else benefits does not diminish whether or not you're going to be able to benefit.
Right.
I think a lot of times jealousy springs up. I was with somebody recently who just talked about how jealousy is a major issue for them. When they see somebody else have something that they don't have, it just rises up in them. They don't know why. And it's an illogical concept. If God is really on the throne and he has everything necessary, he can provide every resource, then when he chooses to bless somebody else, that does not diminish the opportunity for him to bless me. It's not like he was like, I've only got a little bit left. Who am I going to give it to? Once I give it to, we're all done. I don't have any more. Right? He's fine. And so we can celebrate when other people are blessed and their blessing is different from our blessing. Right. We can, right? Yeah, and there's no reason that we should be jealous when God's kind to others. If we could learn to celebrate, our life would be so much better. Book of Romans chapter 12 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice." Yeah.
Well, that is a great place to end. And hopefully we will see you on Monday on the Bible Guys.